When you are putting together your SketchUp model, it is good to have kind of tidy habits for your modeling. One thing to do to kind of make your modeling go a little faster, a little cleaner, as mentioned earlier when I talked about styles, using a style that has the little clock next to it. That little clock indicates a fast style, and that will help you to make your model zip along a little better. You can also turn off textures. Those tend to be a big time drag on your system. But another thing you can do, you can zoom way out, and I have this exterior overview. But sometimes you'll have objects that are way off in outer space somewhere. For example, I may have a component that somehow escaped me. So hitting the Zoom Extents button will zoom you all the way out so that you can see any objects that are kind of almost invisible from your main view. Here I've got a little random square that I must have drawn accidentally. I can just delete it. Now when I click Zoom Extents, it should zoom me to everything it finds, and now it doesn't find any random stuff. So you'll want to delete all those extra objects if possible. Let me go back to my interior here. Another thing you can do is to purge your model. And what you can do to do that is go to the Window pull-down menu and choose Model Info. And there are a number of panels on this dialog. But the big one that we're concerned with, first of all, the file, if you look at that one, it will tell you the size of your model. Now, right now, this is about 55 megabytes, which is a pretty big file. But some of you, I have seen, can produce models well in excess of 100 megabytes, and that can get a little taxing on your system, or even a fancier system. So if you go to the statistics panel of this model, you can do what's called purging, which basically removes, as it says here, all unused components, yada, yada, yada. I'll just click on that. You can also click on the Fix Problems button, and usually SketchUp will warn you if there was a problem when you open the file. But right now, it just says no problem. Now, when I save the drawing, I can recheck the File tab and see if I saved any space, and in fact I did. You can see I saved about 5 or 6 megabytes, which is about 10% of the model size. That will help me out. Let's talk a little bit about some of the specialized tools that SketchUp has. There are a few that come with SketchUp kind of out of the box, and one that I particularly like is called Sandbox tools. And we can call these up by going to the View pull-down menu, Tool Palettes, and Sandbox. There's a little tool palette that comes up. PC users can right-click on a blank area of this toolbars, and they'll see a long list of tool palettes that are available. They can call up Sandbox that way. And the way this works, there's basically a couple of tools. You can draw a grid that can be manipulated using some simple tools. Now, Sandbox actually is really great if you ever have to draw terrain. But for us, we just like to draw, pillows and that sort of thing. So I'm going to click the Draw a Grid tool. And you can specify down here on the lower right the grid spacing. And I might make it 6 inches. Hit Enter. And now when I start my grid, you'll see kind of an iconic representation of the spacing of the grid. I'll just draw it out like that. To make manipulations to this grid, you have to use the modified tool, double click on it, and now you're editing it. It's basically a group. And there's a special tool called Smooth, which has an up and down arrow over the grid. Click on that. You can specify a radius. I think 30 feet is the default. I'm going to use 2 feet. You'll see that number show up down here. But now your cursor will become a circle, and you can click and drag on different parts of this grid. And you can drag them up or down. You can drag corners. You can make this into something really interesting. You can even drag that up. You can smooth parts that you have smoothed before. You can also, if you select this group, you can rotate it. I'll just use my move tool to rotate it around. And now, double click on it again, click on my smooth tool, and I can pull it, and it always goes up and down. So you'll have to take that into consideration, but you can get some really interesting effects. And of course, for now, this is going to be some kind of bizarre wall sculpture. Anyway, once you've created your interesting object here, you can select it. I'll just triple click on it. And you can smooth it out. Not smooth, but smooth. And this is done using the Soften/Smooth Edges tool. And some people just leave this up if they're doing a lot of smoothing around. Anyway, you can check the Softened Coplanar, and you can drag this up. And now you have an object that can be pretty interesting, especially nice if you're trying to do some landscaping or just have some kind of organic sculpture-shaped object in your project. You might say, are there any other fun tools that are native to SketchUp? Well, one that I particularly like are called solids tools. And if you have a bunch of solid objects, and I've made little boxes out of groups, you can take them and modify them by kind of subtracting them from each other. You can see here, because they're groups, they don't divide each other up like you might want. If I wanted to, for example, turn this into one single object, I can select these objects, and then under the Tools menu, under Solid Tools, there are a couple of options here. I can split them, intersect them, trim them, subtract, or union. You can experiment with each of these. They do kind of what you think they'll do. Union will join them all together. Subtract will subtract one from another. Trim will cut away one from the other. And intersect will give you an object that's only the intersection of two of these. And split, I don't even know what split does. Let's just do union. And now what you'll see is that they've all become one big happy object. There should be, if I delete one of these surfaces, there should be hollows where they intersected before. How is this useful? Well, for one, if you have complicated objects, you can simplify them significantly. Also, this gives you something like a modular piece of furniture, for example, very quickly by just drawing simple shapes. One thing you can do, by the way, is you can have these toolbars readily available. For example, I called up this sandbox toolbar. I can just close it, and when I'm done with it, I can also close this one. You can also add toolbars to your toolbar area. Now, on a Mac, it's a little different. On a PC, when you go to the Tool Palettes menu, you have a long list of toolbars, including the solids tools that we just demonstrated here. On a Mac, sadly, you don't have that. I don't know why they don't have it divided into toolbars. They should. For Mac users, they will have to go on the toolbar, right-click on it, and choose Customize Toolbar. And you'll end up with a menu of basically every tool that's in SketchUp, including the ones we were just using, the outer shell tool. And you can drag those right up onto your toolbar if you want. You can also drag things off of your toolbar if you feel like you're not going to use them. Now, what if you want even more options for tools to add? Well, as I mentioned, SketchUp is kind of like a simple smartphone in that it has very basic tools, but you can add to them using what are called extensions. And this is sort of like apps that you would see in the App Store. In fact, there's even an extension warehouse. I'll show you that right up here on the toolbar. It looks suspiciously like a box of clam strips that you can get here in New England. Anyway, when you open that up, there is a whole warehouse, a whole essentially app store of fun toys that you can add to your SketchUp interface. Now, many of these are ones that really aren't useful for us, but one that I happen to like, it actually shows up here in this list as the default list. It's called 1001 Bit Tools. It's a little old, but it's also free, and we like free. And you can also search for 1001 Bit Tools if yours doesn't show up on the top of the list. And to install one of these apps, it's very similar to an app store. You just click Install, And what will happen, you will have to log in to the extension warehouse, which I've already done using my username. It will also warn you if the extension hasn't been updated recently and it's not as recent as your version of SketchUp. I'm going to install it anyway. It will also ask you questions about do you want to allow it permissions, that sort of thing. Of course I do, or else I wouldn't have clicked on it in the first place. And now it should be part of my project. Each extension that you can add, and there are a lot of different ones, will do different things. Some of them will not have a toolbar. Some of them will. This one actually can have one big toolbar, several smaller toolbars, or I can just add individual tools to my standard default Mac toolbar. Anyway, there are so many tools here, I'm not going to show you them all. However, I will show you the most fun ones. The one that I think is the most useful for us as designers is the wall tool. You just click on the tool. Usually with most of these tools, a menu pops up asking you, what do you want to do with this wall? What are the dimensions? You can change them to be whatever you want. You can also add profiles and things like that to the wall, and you can control how it's drawn. But basically, if you click Build Wall, now I can start to draw walls around my project. And what's cool about that, they come in as a group that can be edited. You can also use one of the other tools. It's right next to Wall. It's called the Opening tool, and you can make an opening of whatever width you want, 3 feet by 5 feet. And you can create this opening, and the way you show where the opening goes, you have to kind of click to define a horizontal location and then click several times to enter it. And it cuts a hole right through your wall. This is a really quick way to generate kind of a three-dimensional project from really not much at all. What other tools are available here in the 1001-bit tools? Well, there really aren't 1001, but there are a few other quickie tools that I happen to like. There's a couple of stair tools. If I click on the Build Staircase tool, and this is the kind of out and back staircase tool, you can define a number of different aspects of this, including the riser height, how many risers you want, or you can tell it to calculate the distance between floors, and of course this staircase direction. I'll just click Build Staircase. It wants to know what direction you want the staircase to go in, and then click to place it. Obviously, that saves you a lot of time. It may not be the kind of staircase you like, but it is certainly a lot less time consuming than trying to build it on your own. One tool that might be helpful in our little project is the window frame tool, or it's actually panel tool. And I can turn my little glass box into something that actually has frames to it. Let me hide the exterior building, which I put on a layer. And then I'll call up this frame tool. It's over here, and it looks like, well, like a window frame. Just click on that, and it gives you a number of different options for creating panels. Maybe I'll just have 2 rows, but 10 columns. Let's see if that looks good. And there's a number of different profiles you can use. You can have a rectangular frame with a recessed and extruded edge. This is as opposed to just a rectangular frame that's a little more simple, or one with a beveled edge. Not a lot of options, but there are some. And you can actually control these things more minutely. But then just click Create Window Frame. It will ask you to select a face to divide. I'll just click on this face, and you can see it's divided it up. Now, if that's not quite the spacing that I want to have, just hit Undo, Command Z. Go back to the window frame tool, or panel divider, I guess, and change the number of spaces. You can't change it afterwards. It's just one of those things. This will create a panel that's actually a group. You can select it, move it around. You can even double click on it and paint it some material. And it's set up very nicely, as you can see. Now, if you're going to put a panel on the front of this space, You can use the same tool, but you can't use the same number of panels because, of course, if this was divided into 10, they'd be too small. I believe I have 6 spaces between my columns in the front, so I'm going to go with that one. If I keep the same number of rows, then it should divide up this face with the same spacing. And there we go. So you can pretty quickly create a box for your project that looks suspiciously like a curtain wall frame. And I'll do the other 2 sides at my leisure. So, still not finding enough tools to add to your SketchUp interface? Well, besides the extension warehouse, there's a whole website out there devoted to SketchUp. It's called SketchUcation. And in fact, there are a lot of resources here, including tutorials at different levels. It's really a great site. Many of the plugins, in fact, probably most, are free. One that I happen to like that I think is useful for our purposes is called Frito Corner. And you can watch the little video. It shows you how it works. This is great for things like couches, cushions, and other sort of softer interior objects. And extensions that come from SketchUcation are a little more complicated to install. First of all, you have to log in. Then you have to download the app. So back in SketchUp, to install that extension that you went to go and get, go to the Window pull-down menu, and there is an extension manager. And what this will do, this will show you any extensions that are already in your project. Let me just move this out of the way. And I have Sandbox on and it is enabled. There are a couple of other random ones. You can install a new one. There's a button down at the bottom. So you click on that button. You'll want to browse for the tool that you downloaded. In this case, it is a Frito tool called Frito Corner. This one also uses a library of features that makes it work, so you can download that as well. But anyway, just click Open, and it will install into your system. And then you can close the extension manager. Now, mine has installed a little toolbar. If you don't see the toolbar, you'll have to call it up using the View Toolbars menu. Anyway, select the objects that you want to modify, and then the tools are generally pretty straightforward. You just kind of look at them. It gives you a number of parameters. Let me just drag this down, many of which you can change just by clicking in there and changing their values. For example, 4 inches might be better for that rounding parameters. And you'll see what it looks like here in a kind of preview. You can preview it by clicking the Toggle Preview tab. If you don't like what you're seeing, you can again change these features. And then when you like it, just click Generate Geometry or hit Enter. And now you have a smoothed object. What's nice about this is these objects are simple SketchUp objects. I simplified these series of boxes, if you remember, and now it will smooth them appropriately based on the joints. And there are so many different options here. I'm not going to get into each one, but this is a really fun tool, and it's a great way to generate soft objects. One last tool that I really like is called Clothworks. And this is a terrific tool for doing sort of more organic-y shapes that want to fit around other shapes. So for example, I'm going to try and draw a tablecloth on this little round table. I'll just draw a rectangle on top of it. Maybe I'll make it 4 feet by 4 feet by just typing in 4 feet, 4 feet. I'll select the new rectangle, make it a group, and now I can move it into position on top of the table. You want it to be up above the table just a little bit, so make sure you move it up. And I'll just move it up 6 inches or so. But what you can do using Clothworks, once I've installed it, and I got it from the SketchUcation website, you can just right-click on some object that you want the cloth to bend over and choose Make Collider under the Clothworks submenu. You can also right-click on the object itself and choose Make Cloth. And that tells the Clothworks app that, oh, this is what you want to fiddle around with. This is what you want to make a piece of cloth. Now, you can also define how soft, I guess, the cloth is. Now, the free version doesn't have quite all the options that this one does. I've sadly had to pay for this one. But you can apply a simple grid to even the free version. It gives you a default value, which I'm just going to go with here. Then it's just a matter of hitting play here on the Clothworks menu. There are a couple of other buttons which are a little more complicated. I'm not going to go into every option on this tool, but needless to say, it can do quite a lot. When I hit play, you'll see that the cloth starts to go down over the table. You can even drag pieces of it if you want kind of a ruffly look to it. And then when it looks the way you want, you just hit stop. And there you go. You have a lovely tablecloth that you can even paint some solid color, and it looks very nice. If you do want it to show up in all of your tables, you'll have to copy and paste it into the inside of the component, and that way it'll be on all of them. But Clothworks is a really fun one, especially if you're doing something like curtains and you want it to have a sort of softer, less computer-generated feel. This is a nice way to do that. So I would strongly recommend exploring the extension warehouse and seeing if you can find some tools that you're going to find useful. For us, we already have, for example, a rendering tool that we're going to use called Enscape. We don't need to get it here, but maybe you do other things. We can go to the interior design industry, or if you find that you're making a lot of furniture or other things in your projects, by all means, go and find some tools. There are a lot of ways to speed up your workflow with really simple but powerful tools.